Hello and welcome to my podcast, Conversations with David. I am your host, David Owasi. And on this podcast, we're talking to professionals and entrepreneurs across the country. We are learning about what keeps them passionate, what keeps them going, and also we're talking about lessons learned along the way. I am here with my very good friend, Karly Renman. I have known her for a couple of years now, and I'm excited to have her on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself, Karly?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today. My name's Karly. I grew up in a small town in Alberta, Camrose. And yeah.
That's exciting, Karly. I know you and I got to know each other running businesses, College Pro. Why don't you walk me through your entrepreneurship journey? Why were you even interested in running a business in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. So I started my first business pretty young. After high school, I went to Augustana University for a year, and that's kind of when I fell into this painting world. I just saw this sign on the bathroom wall, and I was like, I need to see what this is all about. I guess it really intrigued me, making your own hours and, being really in control of how much money you make and how hard you work and all of that stuff. So that's kind of what I was really intrigued about when I first got into business.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious about your experience in your first year of business. And the reason why I ask that is, a lot of our listeners, they're probably thinking, should I start my first business or should I, go into entrepreneurship as a whole? What was your first year being a business owner like?
It was really hard. But the program, like with College Pro, with all of the support and the other entrepreneurs and the guidance, I think that was like a huge key to, not quitting. Running a business, I think, is really difficult. So when you get started, I think it's really important to have those key people beside you to support you and to guide you.
For sure. Well, I remember in my first year of business, it was a bit of a gong show.
Yeah.
I was I was pretty incompetent in a lot of areas, and you're right. Having the right people and support network is really, really key to being successful. What would you say was your biggest learning point from that first year of business for you? For myself, I would say like my biggest point was really learning the idea of work ethic and just how to put in those hours. What would you say was your biggest takeaway from your first year?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of relatable to what you just said. I think one of the things I learned in my first year was goal setting. And if you miss your weekly goal, you need to make up for it. I think that's really key when you make this long-term goal and then you break it down into sections and then you break it further down into weeks. And if you miss a week, you're not going to hit your long-term goal unless you make it up the week after. And by knowing that, you have to put in the work to make up the time. So I think work ethic and goal setting was really key learning in my first year of business.
Absolutely, Karly. And you really mentioned a really important point on the idea of goal setting. It is very normal to think of, okay, I want to do like $100,000 in revenue this year, but not breaking it down to actionable steps on a short term. Can you just kind of walk me through your process? How would you break your big goals that you have? And it's very easy to have big goals, but can you walk me through that process for yourself, how you break it into short-term, smaller goals that are actionable?
Yeah, so with College Pro, we started with deciding how much money we wanted to make. So it was kind of cool. I never really knew that's how you should do business. So that was kind of exciting. And then from there, you figure out what your revenue needs to be. Then we broke it down into proximals, which was about 6-week periods. And from there into weekly goals. And then from there, it really did break down into daily goals. How many people do you need to call? How many doors do you need to knock on? Translates into how many estimates you're going to do. It translates into how many jobs you're going to book. So those are kind of like those steps that all gets broken down into very actionable items.
Absolutely. And you are one of the monsters, if you will, from College Pro years with the numbers you were able to put up. I believe you did like almost 1 million in 6 years. Is that accurate?
I think I did 1 million in 4 years.
1 million in 4 years, even more
Yeah.
impressive. Like that's just like mind-boggling. Like how were you able to pull something like that? Like what was that? What was that like for yourself?
Um, well, I think it kind of started in my first year. I had a
Mm,
really good coach, Nicole Gallup,
mm,
and I remember one time in the summer, she came down to Camrose where I was running my business for my first year.
mm,
It was like midsummer, and we sat down on the side of the road and we were looking at the numbers. and everything was going really well. I was
Mm.
hitting my goals. I was on track, or my goal was to do 105, because that was, at that time, I didn't really know where to set my goal. I didn't know, like, $20,000 of profit. What does that mean to me? I've never had $20,000 before. So I actually set my goal at 105, because that would enable me to go to Press Club. I think that year was Vegas. So I was
Mm.
like, yeah, I want a free trip to Vegas. So my goal is 105. Um, and then when I sat down with Nicole in the middle of my summer, everything was going really well and I was trending 105. And she said, you know what? Like, if you just book like 2 more jobs a week, if you just do 3 more hours of marketing a week, you could make more money, you could do higher revenue. And that was kind of like a light bulb moment to me, like, well, that doesn't sound that hard. Like, just hire 1 more marketer, just do a little bit more work, maybe bring on another painting crew. So I think that, so I did that. And then I set another goal, which I think was 135. And then I think I ended up hitting in my first year 137.
Mm.
So from there, the next year in business, then I moved to Edmonton. I just figured, well, I did 137. I might as well push myself. I might as well grow. So I made a bigger goal. And then in my third year, same thing. I might as well push myself. I might as well learn how to grow. So I set an even bigger goal. And then in my fourth year, I wanted to hit the million over those 4 years. So that was my goal. And I guess I hit it.
Very cool. Well, you have a remarkable ability to consistently hit your goal. And honestly, that is not easy. Like, just for myself, that was one of the key skills I had to learn. It's very easy to set goals. So, you set a big goal for the year. And maybe even if you have the skill to set goals into like weekly actionable goals, but hitting them and executing is a whole different conversation altogether. What would you say was key for you to actually be able to consistently hit your goals? Because for you to pull such big numbers, like even if you're off by 1 week, it could really derail, your entire year. How would you say someone, what would your advice be for someone who is struggling with executing their goals? How were you able to do that yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing in College Pro was, like you said earlier, was the work ethic.
Hmm.
It did take a lot of grit,
Hmm.
and there were some times where I'd get up at 6 a.m., leave the house, and I wouldn't get back until 11 p.m.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a regular occurrence because I was so determined to hit those goals. So
Hmm.
I think that's really key. But the second thing is to lean on those around you, also, like we talked about earlier, because they're probably figured out a way to do something easier. So I think that's really key when you're trying to hit goals. If you miss a week,
Hmm.
figure out what went wrong and how can you readjust for the next week.
Hmm.
I used to say in College Pro to other people, other franchise managers, that if you miss 1 week, it's not a huge deal. But if you miss your proximal goal, like that 4 to 6 week goal that you made for yourself, you're probably not going to hit that long-term goal. So
Hmm.
it's okay to miss a week as long as you make up for it.
Right. And just for our listeners, College Pro is a franchise style of business where we're painting houses, residential and commercial properties. And this was typically done while in university. So it was a very, very interesting program. And, Karly and I were very privileged to be part of that program. But Karly, just to pick on some of the things you were saying, it sounded like you had a strong why, because it's easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to do boom 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 and hit those goals, but if you don't really have a strong motivation for something that's driving you, it's really hard to put in those 60-80 hour weeks that we had to put in sometimes. Number one, I have two questions for you on that note. Number one, what was your why? What was the strong driver behind that relentless energy and passion? And number two, how can someone who is struggling to find their why, how can they really help? How can they find that answer? How can they find out why to drive them?
Yeah. Great questions. I think I would start with the second question.
Mhm.
We did this workshop in like a College Pro conference of finding your why.
Mhm.
And there's your paper and there's your pen and you're supposed to write down your why. And I struggled. I was like, I don't know what to put. I don't know what to put on here. So it does take, I do think it takes a lot of thought into your why, and to
Mhm.
really dig down deep and ask why more than one time. Like, if your goal is to make $20,000, well, why is that your goal? If your goal is to just hit your goal, why is that your goal? And then to keep like digging down why,
Mhm.
and then you finally find like your root cause or your root why of why you're doing all of this.
Mhm.
um so I I feel like in my memory, I really wanted to hit my goals because I wanted to prove to myself that I can do what I say I'm going to do. Um, one of my big whys, I grew up, I was raised by a single mom for like a part of my life where we had to move into my grandma's house. And I just remember this time thinking like, I don't want that for my kids. Like one day I want to have kids and I don't want to have to move in to my parents' house. So I just figured like I'm going to figure out how to make enough money by myself, no matter what. If I have kids and then I ended up raising them by myself, like God forbid, hopefully that doesn't happen. And I don't have kids yet, but I want to be able to provide for them. So that was a really strong why for me, is figuring out how to do these business skills, how to make this money, so that if I'm ever in a situation where I can't support my kids, I know I can go back and lean on these skills and figure it out.
Absolutely. And I do appreciate you sharing that. And when I think about my own experience as well in my first year, that was my second year in Canada as an immigrant from Nigeria. And of course, my family was struggling financially. And for me, this was like the way to really, be independent myself and to make a
Mhm.
living for myself and to pay my tuition. So of course, that was a strong factor. But Carly, at some point especially after that first year of business, surviving doesn't really become a good motivation anymore because you're making enough money to survive. And to do $1 million in 4 years, I would feel like, survival is really not the biggest priority at that point because you're doing fine. How can you find that second gear after you've, gotten over that initial, okay, I need to survive, pay my bills and whatnot? How do you find that second gear to really accomplish more? Or at least how did you find that second gear?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I think I had, so then I had another great coach, Zach Johnson. And he was able to really push me and not let me settle in just doing, oh, I did 135, I'll just do 135 again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he really helped in pushing me, and actually also Connor, because Connor Ilwin, Connor and I were always pretty competitive. So we were
Mm-hmm.
always kind of like neck and neck trying to beat each other. So I think like having that competitiveness and having that coach, pushing you.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really want to settle because I knew that, like, I obviously knew I wasn't going to paint houses forever. It wasn't my passion. It's not my passion. I knew that the purpose of College Pro is to learn how to run a business.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted to get all of those skills. And I knew that if I just did 135 again, I'm not going to learn that much more. But if I push myself to do 200, I'm going to learn a little bit more. If I push myself to do 300, I'm going to learn a little bit more. So that was also kind of like this motivating factor behind my numbers, is I want to do more so that I can learn more so that one day I can go and run another business.
Absolutely. And that's really important. It's not just only just having some level of success, but you're almost trying to push yourself and saying, how much more can I do? How much more can I be better? And that's very key to success in any field, I suppose. But Carly, when you run $1 million in 4 years, of course, you're not doing all of that work by yourself. No, you're still your team, but you need to have strong, reliable people to do some of that work for you. Can you just give me an insight into how you're able to build your team, how you're able to have rock solid crews to be able to do all of that work for you? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I mean that wasn't easy.
Mm,
The best time was when your painter would stick with you for 4 months, but that was kind of rare.
yeah.
So you always had to keep rehiring. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of, you have to be able to be a person that other people want to be around, that other people want to follow. So it does come down to, just being a good person, trying to be respectful. Um, but it also just takes hard work, just continuing to interview, continuing to screen, to find the people that want, I mean, like painting, for some people love painting, some people hate it. So
Mm,
you really have to just go through the work to find the people that you get along with and that they like to paint. I think in my third year, I did hire a production manager.
Mm,
So that was really helpful. He was a really hard worker.
mm,
He also actually enabled me to leave my business for almost a month.
mm,
So that was a pretty cool experience too. I went to Sweden for like 3 weeks or so in the middle of my summer.
mm.
I obviously wouldn't have been able to do that without him managing my business.
Right. That's awesome insight. Thanks, Carly. And, we'll talk a little bit more about your current business right now, but even that question, I guess, we might extend to your gym ownership right now. You have, solid people and you've been able to really navigate the pandemic. Would you say that the same principles you use in your college pro business was sort of applied to your current business right now? Or has anything changed as you've evolved in your business journey?
In terms of the people,
Yes, and just your team, basically, right?
yeah. I think what's really key in the business that I run now is it's a pretty small knit group.
Mhm.
So when we're interviewing people now, it's really important that they have that community. We can keep that culture.
Mm,
So I like to hire people who I think can get along with the other people that we have. That is important in College Pro too, because people usually work in pairs of two. So
mm,
you want to make sure those two people really get along, and they also kind of work at the same speed so
mm.
that they're helping each other and one's not kind of pulling more than the other in workload. So I think that culture piece is really important.
Yeah, and just to give listeners some insight into why that is important. On my first day on the job, as a college pro franchisor, and I was such a horrible boss. It was so bad because I was freaking out when anything went wrong that two of my employees quit on the first day, and that was like a huge disaster for me. But also, it was a moment for me to realize that crap, I have to really manage my employees better. I have to think about the culture, and I have to be very intentional about that. So thanks for sharing all of that insight, Carly. Now, I'd like to transition our conversation into your current business. And so you ran College Pro for 4 years. You did very excellent. And I'm guessing when you graduated from university was when you decided to make a transition. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I think actually did College Pro for 5 years, but the
Okay.
fifth year, I ran it with my now fiance Cole.
Yes.
Um, in between that, I actually in my fourth year of university, I took an exchange to Sweden. So I took a year off of business and I traveled around Europe, which was pretty awesome. And then I came back and I ran a business with Cole.
Mm,
And then we kind of figured like our learning in College Pro kind of tapped out.
hmm.
So we wanted to kind of get started in a different business, something that we were a bit more passionate about. So we were looking around in the fitness industry
Mm,
for a business to run. So we were living in Edmonton, and eventually we moved to Calgary because more of our friends were in Calgary,
hmm.
and we lived. I think it was about 2 years we lived here before we started. Before we got into Urban Athlete.
Mm. So I guess my question will be, what was that thought process like while you were making a decision on the next move? And the reason why I asked that is, some of our listeners were probably trying to think of their first business or maybe their second business, right? And that's really a hard thing to think about if you're trying to make that change. What was going through your mind, or what was the process or the conversation between you and Cole as you were trying to decide on your next step?
Yeah, so let me just start with the first business. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was really important in your first business to learn a lot.
Mm,
So I don't think you necessarily should go start a business that you're really passionate about. I think you should start a business where you're just gonna get down and dirty and learn a lot, which is what College Pro, which is running a painting business is you
mm,
just learn so many things from doing that.
mm,
That we felt pretty prepared to take on something else. So we decided now that we have like these skills that we learned, why don't we pick something that we're a bit more passionate about? And that was kind of just our thought there.
mm.
And it was like a year to a year and a half of like figuring out, like we talked about food trucks and restaurants, and like we talked about a lot of things. So it was a pretty long process
Mm.
figuring it out.
Absolutely. And I guess you've always been someone who is passionate about fitness and the whole fitness industry. You've always had that passion, considering you're very, very competitive. Was that a natural evolution, considering you were in that industry already and you were, working out? I think you always did like what was it now? I know back then you guys would have all of this competition where you, I'm trying to remember what they're called again. It was this huge fitness fad at the time, anyways. But I'm just curious, how did you decide to buy this business you guys did, and what was that process like buying a new business?
Um, Yeah, so the reason we picked fitness is because I did do bikini competitions.
Okay.
And I grew up pretty active, and that was kind of something I wanted to try. So that really like plunges you into the fitness world like
Mm,
pretty hard. So I got pretty passionate about fitness after starting that. So we decided to, and we were kind of toying with the idea of either starting our own fitness business or buying one that was already on the market.
right.
And so we just started looking around for businesses that were already on the market. And there was a lot of fitness businesses, unfortunately, on the market that were really on fire. And they were like, buy my business because it's
Mm,
on fire. Um, so we didn't really want to buy those ones because they were kind of like scary situations. We did actually make an offer on a gym in BC, and also a business that was on fire, but we decided to make an offer anyways, just to what the heck. They didn't accept our offer, obviously, so that's why we're here today. And then we kept calling around. So we would just drive around the city of Calgary, call numbers on the side of buildings that say that we're for lease.
mm.
And then we just had a really lucky phone call one day. The guy that answered said, what are you looking for? What are you trying to do? And we said, oh, like we're trying to start a fitness business. And they're like, oh, well, I know these two guys that are trying to sell their gym. Are you interested in meeting with them?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of how that happened.
Oh, pretty cool. I've actually never been in a situation where I was buying an existing business. What does that look like? From those conversations you have with the business owner, what are you typically looking for in an existing business? What would you say scares you as a red flag if you're trying to buy an existing business? Can you just share some more insights into that?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, the scariest thing as young entrepreneurs trying to buy a business is that you feel like you don't know very much.
Hmm.
So you're like, are they fooling with us, or like, is this appropriate?
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of like older people
Right.
in business. Um, but the reason we knew why some of the businesses were kind of on fire, just because their cash flow wasn't very good, like they weren't making any money, and they haven't been making money for a long time.
Hmm.
That's obviously not a business that you really want to get into. At that point, you might as well, I mean, unless you know a lot about the industry. And that's kind of the thing. We came from painting. We're not personal trainers.
Right.
So if a business was not making money, and oh, well, we'll just come in and turn it around and make money. Well, if we're not really in the industry, are we really going to be able to do that? So that was kind of like a risk factor that we had to play with.
Hmm.
Whereas when we saw this gym, it looked like it was doing pretty well, and it looked like it had a lot of potential. It wasn't like that. It wasn't really on fire, like in terms of, hurry, buy me. They were like, yeah, like we want to sell because we just want to go do something more passive. So like if it works out, we'll sell. They
Hmm.
weren't pushing the sale,
Hmm.
which was a good sign.
Right, right. So you're not looking for someone who is too desperate to sell, because that might mean a few things might be funny in the background. So if
Yeah.
you were to give yourself an advice based from all your experience now, if you were giving your younger self an advice, your younger self who was trying to buy a business, what would you tell yourself, or what would you tell yourself to your younger self to watch out for, or what would you be advising yourself?
Um, I think if what I would tell my younger self was just to have more confidence
Hmm.
and to not feel like such an imposter,
Hmm.
and that even though we are young, we still know some things, and if we
Right.
don't know it, we can work hard enough to figure it out.
Fair enough. That's an excellent advice. And I guess for anyone, who is trying to grow as an entrepreneur, having that self-confidence is always a very key factor. I know for myself, sometimes that showing confidence was the difference between getting a deal and not getting a deal. And
Mhm.
Sometimes I struggle with the idea of faking it till you make it, because sometimes it's like, you're not original, you're not being true to yourself, but then sometimes it really works, and then you fake it and you make it, and then you really own it because you've made it. But I thought that was a very interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing that. Now, your journey in the fitness industry, I know you started out as a competitor. So you were someone who was, I think you had a bikini fitness competition. Can you kind of walk me through what that experience was like being in a competition like that?
Sure. So I wouldn't say it's exactly a competitive in the sense that college pro is competitive where you're trying to beat someone's numbers. It's
Hmm.
really more like a personal game. And for me, it was pretty difficult because you have to make a lot of sacrifices, um, like with your time and like with your food. But it did just teach me again that when I go after something, I can accomplish it. So it just gave me more confidence, and it taught me more grit and more hardworking. Because the difference with a bikini competition to like a business goal is you can't miss a week.
Right.
So like a business goal, you miss a week, you make up for it. Well, if you don't do all of your cardio in one week, you can't just do double the next week. It doesn't
That's
work like
true.
that. So that's kind of the difference when you do a competition is you always have to be on. You
Hmm.
can never, like you have to be perfect. You can't really mess up,
Hmm.
which might not be the best like for your regular health, but it does teach you how to, how to grind it out.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think I followed your Instagram stories back then when you were prepping for the competition. And it was quite amazing seeing all of the work and intentionality on a week-to-week basis you put into it. I know I can't do it. So kudos on doing that.
Thanks.
Now, I know that you're a weight loss coach and you also coach people in when they're prepping for their own competition. Like, what does a session with you look like? What value would you potentially add to someone who is trying to walk that journey you've done before?
Yeah, so most of the girls that I've coached for bikini competitions has been online.
Hmm.
So I provide them with like I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, so you technically have to say it's an example meal plan that it's an example that you could follow.
Hmm.
Um, but a meal plan and a workout plan, and then we do weekly check-ins just to see how everything's going. I think one of the um, like last year I had 9 girls going to stage, which was really exciting. And I think one of the reasons why I was successful with these girls is because I took a more um, caring approach, where I asked about like how are they really doing? How is their mental state? How is their anxiety? How are they sleeping? More of like a holistic approach, because
Right.
for me, in my first year of competing, that was the hardest part, was like the mental aspect.
Hmm.
So I think the reason why I had success with those girls is because I cared about their mental aspect,
Hmm.
not just I hope you look great on stage, but like how are you actually doing with this process?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that insight. And I think you brought up a very, very important point, which is holistic approach. Now, personally for myself, I think the fitness industry perhaps maybe has a little bit of a bad rep just because most people focus on the weight and how many pounds are you losing and how you look physically. Can you share with me what your thoughts are on what fitness means to you? So, what's the healthy way to approach fitness?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously when you're competing, you have to lose weight. Um, not not very many people walk around stage lean for their regular life. But I wouldn't say that competing is a healthy thing to do because you have to get so lean. But I also do believe that it's important to be healthy and to treat your body right and to put good foods in your body. So it's important that you feel healthy.
Hmm.
Um, weight is, I mean, the weight on the scale is just your gravity, so it's not a huge factor. It does give you a bit of an indication of your health.
Hmm.
It's not the biggest factor of your health, though.
For sure. So not focusing on your weight, more so focusing on kind of everything as well. And I know you've mentioned the mental aspect, right? And that is also a key part in having good health.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
sure. So I know that you have a huge passion for pole dancing. I think it's a very, very fascinating interest. Can you kind of just share with me why that, how you came about pole dancing and why that's a passion of yours?
Yeah, so I started pole dancing because I saw my older sister do it. And, being the younger sister, you want to do what your older sister does. So
Hmm.
I saw her do it, and I tried it. And it was very challenging because you have to be strong, you have to be flexible, and you also have to be graceful. So I found that kind of like trifecta of pole dancing made it really challenging.
Mm.
So I kept going. I kept doing it. I like a challenge. So, and there's always like new tricks you can learn and new things that not just, you don't just have to look good, but you have to be strong to do it, or you have to be flexible to do it,
Mm.
which takes a while to figure out like a new trick.
Right. So it sounds like it's almost another aspect of physical workout for you, almost because you have to be able to be flexible with yourself, and you have to be able to lift yourself. So you have to be very strong and have that strong core. Um, how long have you been doing this for?
It's a good question. At least more than 5 years.
5 years. Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And what does cool things about your pole dancing?
um I mean, I don't really pole dance for him very much. So
Well, I didn't mean it that way. I just, I just meant from a perspective of something, a fitness perspective, I guess is what I was going. But uh,
yeah. Yeah, well, I just mean like I do my own hobbies, and Cole's probably glad I have hobbies and I don't just sit around and be lazy. But I don't think he really cares if it's pole dancing or if it's like archery, or I don't think he really care what it is, but I think he's appreciative that I'm an independent person.
Absolutely. And hey, I do appreciate the fact that you're independent. It's pretty cool. So you have a huge Instagram following. And I think I remember I think it was like the first year after your last year in college, bro. I felt was when you were intentionally building that following. What was that like? You have 16,000 followers now. What does it feel like to have 16,000 followers right now?
But right now it doesn't really feel like much because I kind of lost my interest in it. The reason why I did at one time get interested in it was actually at a college pro houseboating trip.
Hmm.
There was a franchisee who said he makes money from his Instagram, and I was like, "What? I didn't even know that was a thing." And he's like, "Yeah, you just have to get enough followers, and then you can make money." And I was like, "What? It's crazy." So I was like, "I'm gonna try." So I tried, but then after a while, after you get enough followers,
Mhm.
you realize that in order to, unless you're selling your own products, in order to make money, you kind of have to be a sellout.
Right.
And I really was, I did a little bit of that
Mm.
where someone's like, "Hey, put this in your post and you get $100." Like I did a little bit of that, but I didn't do very much because I just felt like a fraud. I was
Mm.
like, I don't want to get paid to tell someone to buy this thing. I want to like actually like it,
Mm.
and then I shouldn't have to get paid because I'm just telling my friend, "Hey, you should try this thing. I really like it." So I kind of lost interest. Like I built it up and I built it up
Mm.
until I realized like, oh, this doesn't feel right for me. So then I figured, well, if I have my own personal like fitness business, then I can use my Instagram for that and keep building my following. But then we bought the gym, and things changed again. So
Absolutely. So it sounds to me like your journey into being an Instagram famous person, I guess, was more of a challenge to see if you could do it, maybe because someone else mentioned it. I guess my question would be, what would your advice be to people who are crazy about attention, or who are crazy about, oh, I want to have 100,000 followers. That's the most important thing to me in the world. What would your advice be to someone like that who's thinking that way?
Um, I would just ask them why. Like,
Mm.
why do you want to do it? If you want to make money, the, then you have to be creative and figure it out. But if you just want 100,000 followers, like it doesn't do anything. Like
Hmm.
my followers, like it doesn't, like it's just a number. It
Right.
doesn't it has no value in my life. I don't think, wow, I have 16,000 followers. Like I honestly don't even think about it. But when I was trying to build it up, obviously I was like, oh, cool. Like I have more followers and I'm building and building. But then eventually I was just like, this isn't important to me anymore. Like, why am I putting my time and energy into this? It's just not important to me anymore.
Fair enough. On the flip side, though, sometimes there's value in building followers, especially if you're trying to create a brand, if you're trying to specifically market something, whether it's personal business or your coaching business. What would your advice be to someone who has the right motivation? They want to build their brand for the right reasons. How can they actually do that? Because you've obviously been very successful at this. Was there some steps you followed? Did you do anything different, or were you just was it just a matter of the right timing when you started doing this, or what are your insights on that?
Um, well, I did a lot of like Instagram research, so I don't know if any of this stuff really applies anymore because they always change the algorithm.
Right.
But it would be like post every day, always reply to people who comment on your posts, always use hashtags, follow other people, so hopefully they follow you back. So kind of like steps like that, which does take a lot of work. So
Mm-hmm.
unless you get like an automatic poster service or something, but yeah, I don't even know if those steps like still apply anymore. But so what I would say is I just researched like, how do you grow your Instagram following? And then whatever those steps were that I researched at the time, that's what I would try to do.
For sure, for sure. Well, it seems to work. So I would say, I guess, it makes sense if you have to be engaged with people and you have to reply to everybody. You have to, be there. It is very important. And also, considering that social media has been very, very, had a negative impact to people's mental health, what would your advice be for having a good balance, especially as we're in a pandemic right now, and, there is more reason, if you will, to spend as much time as you can online? What would be that balance for yourself, or what would be your advice for that?
Yeah, I think the best thing I did was just apply the screen limits so that it tells me like you've done 30 minutes of Instagram, and I'm like, that's probably good enough for today. So pick a limit that works for you and stay within it.
Fair enough. Thanks, Carly. I like to make a little bit of a pivot here. The whole idea of emotional intelligence and soft skills is as a topic that I think is huge and important to me. When you look back at your career, looking at College Pro, looking at your current business ownership, and just general success you've had with coaching people and working with people, what would you say is the role of emotional intelligence or soft skills in your career success so far?
Yeah, I think what's important when you're trying, when you're around other people and trying to lead them or coach them is to compartmentalize.
Hmm.
Everyone has problems, but you shouldn't bring them to work every day. There's a time and place for them, and not saying that you should never talk about your problems, because I think
Mm-hmm.
it's also important to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're trying to get a job done, sometimes it just doesn't really matter what happened the night before at home. You just
Sure.
have to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think compartmentalization is pretty important.
Hmm. And how would you approach compartmentalization? Like, what would you do? Like, how would you deal with that? Because personally, for myself, I feel like if I have issues, I almost want to deal with them right away. Otherwise, it just linger somewhere. And before I know anything, I have a huge outburst and I can't control myself. What's that fine balance for yourself? Or maybe based on your personal experience, if you've had, some issues or you had something negative happen in your life, how do you approach compartmentalizing things to be able to make sure that you don't blow up? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that really helps me is Cole. So because I work with him every day, it's pretty easy when I have and when I get emotional to
Mm-hmm.
just go in the office and shut the door and I just like vent to him. I realize not everybody has a person like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that's really important. The second thing is I do take care of um, my mental health by exercising journaling, decompressing. I think those like little self-care
Hmm.
tactics are important too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. For me, I think one of the keys to dealing with issues like that is I have like three things or four things I always think about. The first one I always think about is awareness, right? So the idea of awareness is understanding what's going on. I think sometimes people kind of blow up because they don't even know how they feel. They don't understand what their emotions are. They can't put a label on it, and not
Mhm.
until like they blow up and they just explode before everyone's like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And then the second thing I always think about is regulation. So, okay, you're aware of these emotions. How do you keep them in check? Which I think is what you were trying to talk about, compartmentalizing things. How do you keep them in check? And then the third thing I always think about is empathy, which is regardless of what's going on with me and all the crap I have to think about how all of my actions affect you to make sure that I am not, what's the right word here? I'm not transferring aggression or transferring my negative energy to you. Based on those three things, would you think they're very important to you? And how have you grown in those skills? How have you grown in your skills of being aware of what you're feeling? How have you grown in your skills of controlling your emotions when things are not going so well? And
Yeah, those are definitely like really important points in regards to emotions. And I think it's kind of um, practice and
hmm,
learning and slowing down and breathing.
hmm,
I think just over time and as you grow up, you
hmm.
learn better how to be aware of your emotions and how to label them so that they don't overrule you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, the pandemic, of course, we're in a pandemic, and your industry has been one of the hardest hit industries. How have you navigated, the huge impact of the pandemic on the fitness industry? How have you been able to solve that challenge and still keep your business afloat in these difficult times?
Yeah, it was really hard.
Mm,
And um, basically, what happened was so we have a business advisor, which I think is really important when you're a young entrepreneur trying to grow your business,
mhm,
is to get people that are smarter than you and more expert at what you're doing.
mhm,
Um, so basically, our business advisor said, you really need to start virtual classes. And this was before we even shut down.
mm,
So we were like, okay, yeah, virtual classes. How do we do that? So we started putting in the work to figure out how do we run a virtual class.
mm,
We had one scheduled for Wednesday morning, and so we kind of like figured it out. We worked with Zoom and we worked with our mics and we kind of figured all these little things out.
mm.
So we're like, okay, we're going to put our first one on Wednesday morning. And then it just so happened that our gym had to close on a Tuesday, the
Right.
Tuesday before our virtual class that was already scheduled. So the day after our business closed, we had our first virtual class,
Mm,
and we've had a virtual class I think every single day since we closed. A lot of not a lot, but like a few of the other businesses in the area took longer to make that pivot. We
mm,
were able to pivot so quickly because we were almost like we were pre-prepared and we didn't even know it. We
mm.
were able to pivot so quickly that our members decided to stay engaged with us and because they didn't have anywhere else to go to
Right.
work out. All the gyms were closed.
Mm,
So yeah, we did like right now, I think we do 30 virtual classes a week.
mm,
So our members were able to stay engaged with us. So we kept a good chunk of our member base throughout the whole close down.
mm,
And I think that was really key, was to pivot quickly, but we
mm,
couldn't have done that without our advisor.
mm,
The other key thing, again, this is why it's important to have these support people and to be resourceful.
mm.
We have a good friend of ours who's a lawyer, and in like a day, he
Hmm.
wrote up an equipment rental agreement.
Hmm.
So then we were able to rent out a lot of our gym equipment that
Ah.
obviously wasn't being used. And again, we wouldn't have been able to do that without having that resource and having that person to make this agreement for us.
Hmm.
So that was also something that we got off the ground really quickly.
Hmm.
So even though our gym was shut down, I think like I almost feel like since owning Urban Athlete, that like month being shut down was the hardest I've worked in
Hmm.
Urban Athlete. Figuring out how to run good virtual classes and renting out of our equipment and thinking of challenges to keep members engaged. And
Hmm.
yeah, we worked really hard to make it work.
Wow, that's really clever. I really like the renting of the equipment to people. That is amazing, actually. That's really cool. So it sounds to me like, based on everything we've talked about so far, from, your college pro journey to now, the the advantage of having a coach, a good coach, seems to be one of the drivers behind your success. Someone who can give you the good advice, who can kind of take an outside perspective, look at your business and provide some feedback. How would you choose a coach? Now, I know in college pro, your coach was kind of a default and you didn't have much of a say. But now that you've actually owned your own independent business, you've actually gone out to still find an advisor. What was your process in finding one? And what would your advice be to someone who is starting their own business and don't have access to coaches? How should they go find one?
Yeah, so a lot of the College Pro alumni created, I mean, this isn't like a plug, but created a business, Cultivate Advisors.
Okay.
So there's lots of advisors on their team.
Mhm.
So I reached out to the original coach I had in my first year of College Pro, Nicole Gallup.
Mm,
She's on the Cultivate Advisors team. So I reached out to her and I said,
mm,
hey, why don't you coach us again?
mm,
Which is pretty cool, actually. So she coached us for a little bit until another advisor came onto the team that actually has ran multiple gyms.
mm.
And Nicole said, I actually think you should meet with this advisor because she has so much industry experience, which is
Right.
what we were lacking.
Mm.
So that's basically how we got our coach.
For sure. And for someone who perhaps did not have access to such networks, right, and they're still looking for a coach, what should they be looking for in a coach? Would there be one or two, three things you should be looking for?
Um, well, I think it depends what you're lacking at. So, like for Cole and I, we did need a coach who had the industry experience.
Mm,
I think it's also important to have a coach who can hold you accountable. Um, when you set goals, like they're there to make sure you hit those goals. I think that's
right.
really, really important.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I would say those two things, industry experience. And if you know the industry, then
mm,
you get a coach that maybe has the business skill
mm,
experience.
mm.
Maybe you lack in financials or marketing, then get a coach who's good at that if you know your industry.
Right. Yeah, that's a very, very good answer, Carly. And when I think about, from my perspective, I do some coaching as well. I coach franchisees across the country with a company called Go Oil. I'm always thinking about something you've mentioned, which is a holistic approach to coaching. So I think that for you to run a successful business, it's not just about the numbers, right? It's about how you actually, your mental health yourself, how you are treating yourself, how much rest you get, how hard you work, and of course the traditional things like someone keeping you accountable to your goals and the numbers. But having a holistic approach, I think, is always key to success. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I think the what I've learned working with the Cultivate advisors is they ask quite often, like, how would you rate your work-life balance?
Mm,
Which is not a question I ever asked myself in College Pro. It was never, are you having a date night Friday night? No, it was like, you're working all the time. So it's kind of since I've started Urban Athlete that I figured that I've started to think about, like, how can I run my business and have a life?
mm,
So I agree. And I what I've learned is that if you do, like, treat yourself well with your life outside of work,
mm,
your work is better. You're better able to lead people, to manage people, to think creatively if
mm.
you're not burnt out all the time.
Absolutely. And being burnt out is awful. It's the worst thing in the world. And I have felt that way myself a couple of years, especially in my college pro years where, there was a lot on the line for me. And if I can pay my tuition, if I don't, make money, and there was a lot at stake. But you're less productive if you're burnt out. You're not operating at any capacity, at least not 100%, and taking that time to rest or spend time with family or whatever it is always very important. What would you say you do to kind of take some time away or to take some time off for your own well-being? What kind of activities do you do to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess owning a gym, it's important that I also partake in the gym exercises.
Hmm.
So I would say that's a key one. and then like pole dancing, and, you know, just having these other hobbies. I recently started taking music lessons. So I think those are all like good things to do. And I'm not, but I'm not saying like, you know, every week you need to have this perfect balance. I do think that there's a time and place where you need to grind out your business.
Right.
So I think that once in a while, it's good to work really hard.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I do agree with that as well. Sometimes you just have to put it all out there and do that odd 60, 70 hour week, but then you got to make sure the next 2 weeks you're not, you're taking some time off to kind of relieve the pressure. The last question I have for you, Karly, and we've had a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed that conversation. Of course, we're in a pandemic, and we've talked about how the pandemic has affected your business and the elegant and creative way you guys have kind of walked around that challenge. But from a personal perspective, would you say what would you say has the impact of the pandemic has been personally on yourself, on you, as you navigate, all the challenges of coronavirus and everything? How has that affected you personally, and how are you, approaching that challenge? And the reason why I ask that is, our listeners will be, everyday people, business owners, regular people who are also trying to navigate that challenge. And I think sometimes it's helpful to hear other people's perspective, how they're approaching that challenge.
Yeah, I think what's been challenging is kind of the social aspect.
Mm,
And almost like, I wouldn't say I'm a very like touchy-feely person, um, but like hugs, like it just is so weird that I can only hug Cole, you know, like I think it's really sad.
mm,
And I think that, you know, like don't get too close to me and like don't breathe on me. And yeah, I think that's been a challenge.
mm,
I've had some really like I have really great friends here in Calgary.
mm,
So we've, you know, there's like 10 of us, which is like a good number,
mm-hmm,
to have like your little cohort. And we've been able to get together quite often. Actually, I had a great summer. I had a really good summer without
mm.
traveling and without like hugging random people. But at least I could hug my friends, and hang out with them a lot. And I think that was really really key. Is, you know, don't make sure you don't get lonely and still go hang out
Yeah.
with your cohort.
Yeah, I really think that's a really, really important point you brought up there is, really leaning on those around you. It doesn't have to be like 100 people, but I'm pretty confident that, people can find two, three, four, five, six, 7 people in their lives where you can have consistent conversations, whether it's on Zoom or video chat. And to be a little bit honest with you, one of the reasons why I started doing this podcast, a little bit of a selfish reason on my part, is because I just miss having good conversations. I am a person who really, really enjoy deep, intellectual, philosophical, and just meaningful conversations and connections with people, if you will. And I figured, well, if I'm missing that, I'm pretty sure other people are missing that too. And I figured, if I connected with people like yourself in my network across the country, I can really learn some insight, have some wonderful conversation, and hopefully build stronger relationships. So that's kind of why I'm doing this. So, last question I have for you, Colin, is a little bit of a different one. And I'm trying to get you to make some future predictions. And basically, the question is, what do you think will change over the next few years as a result of the pandemic? Of course, the pandemic has affected every part of our lives worldwide. Everybody has been affected, and that is bound to cause some changes one way or the other. What are your insight or thoughts? And of course, there's no right or wrong answer, but what are your insight or thoughts into how the future will change as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think like if I start pes-
Pessimistic.
yeah, if I start with a pessimistic view, I think it's gonna be a few years where people are still scared of other people, which I think is gonna be really sad. Like scared of, you know, standing too close, touching other people. You know, I think that's gonna continue for a few years. But if I
Mm,
take an optimistic view, I think people are going to appreciate local businesses more, which would be
mm,
great for me.
mm.
Um, but as I'm hoping that people will, you know, value local more.
Yeah, that is actually a very good perspective. Yeah, valuing local. I actually consult with a company right now in Manitoba, and all the focus is trying to work with local vendors to get their products out to people who like to shop local. And I think across the country and perhaps even across North America, at least, that is becoming a huge trend, especially with all your big Walmart and your Amazon that has kind of dominated the market.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty cool. Any last words of wisdom or advice or perspectives or thoughts for our listeners before I let you go?
Um, yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would like to add related to the pandemic and to business, like, there was a lot of times throughout the year where I was like, this isn't fair and I'm so mad and like, how can this happen to my business? And it's okay. That's a very reasonable response. It's okay to think that way, but you can't get stuck there. I actually have a really great sweater that says "Don't get stuck" like all over it. I love the sweater because you can't get stuck in this victim mentality. Sure, my business is closed. Sure, now that it's open, my classes are reduced to less than half in capacity, and it sucks.
Mm,
But it's not gonna. Having this victim mentality doesn't change the situation. What changes the situation is saying, "What can I do now?"
mm.
And I think that's really key for anyone anyone living with the pandemic. Yeah, it sucks, but what can you do now to make it better?
Wow, you should consider a career in motivational coaching. That was a great one. Thank you, Carly. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. There's been so much I've learned from our conversation tonight, from yourself, your background, your business, and just what's the driver behind your success. I think you're very impressive, and I'm sure you're only going to do even more amazing things in the next future. And I'm glad I can call you my friend.
Thank you so much, David. It's been such a pleasure. And like you said earlier, it's actually really nice to have these deep conversations, especially in this time.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming to the show, and I'm sure we'll have you again at some point in the future.